The 1245th day of the war. Ukraine has determined the date of new negotiations with Russia. They must take place on Wednesday, that is, already tomorrow. To make Putin and his negotiating team talkative, Senator Lindsey Graham promised to kick Putin in the ass with secondary sanctions against the buyers of Russian oil. The next Ramstein, Ukraine promised ammunition and UAVs, which is an important investment in Ukrainian defense. First of all, long-range drones and interceptors. To load the orders of the Ukrainian PC, you need to find another $6 billion, said the new Defense Minister Denys Shmyhal. This is actually the beginning. In Russia, a transport collapse continues in airports and railway stations. Ukraine supports the Tsarist chaos, continues to strike on the railway infrastructure. This time, it flew over the Kamennolomni station in the Rostov region. Moreover, it is so strong that Ukrainian channels suspected the use of domestic ballistic weapons. Russian troops are trying to advance in all directions. They are trying to reanimate the offensive on Sumy and are preparing for the attack on Pokrovsk, where they already capture the Russian DRG. Despite this, the pace of the offensive is dropping for the second week in a row, and it is not surprising that the elite of the Russian paratroopers are sitting without supplies, while in the rear of the officials they chop the money through various funds, which is what the Russian soldiers themselves report. The Russian military went on vacation, got married, and immediately killed his wife during the first wedding night. Earlier, he had already beaten his wife and signed a contract to avoid prison for debauchery. Now, of course, he plans to return to the front to kill someone else later if he does not die from the Ukrainian drone. This and much more in today's fresh summary, which you can support with your like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. These actions help promote the video, especially your subscriptions for YouTube algorithms when you subscribe during or immediately after watching. This is one of the most important indicators indicating that the video must be spread wider. Therefore, thank you very much to everyone who subscribes and those who have already subscribed. Well, if you want to support the channel financially, then you can do it on Patreon, the link to which is in the description. Subscribe to various levels of support, get all sorts of bonuses, which depends on the size of the subscription. Well, you can also buy NVPN. This is a means of bypassing blockages that allows you to bypass blockages. Watch YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, Instagram, go to blocked media. Soon in Telegram, which is also obvious, will soon be blocked. In general, all this is available to you with NVPN. Buy it by the link in the description, thereby you support this channel. There are no oligarchs, no banks, no, I don't know, state intelligence, grants, and something else. There is only, alas, and thank you very much for this. Well, we move on to what happened in the past day. New meeting of the delegation of Russia and Ukraine is planned on Wednesday, July 23, said Zelensky. Today I discussed with Rustem Umerov the preparation for the exchange of another meeting in Turkey with the Russian side. Umerov reported that the meeting is scheduled for Wednesday. Tomorrow there will be more details, said the president of Ukraine the day before. Earlier he said that in the new round of negotiations with Russia, the discussion of the next exchange of prisoners, as well as the possible future meeting of Putin and Zelensky, is planned. I repeat, do not wait for special results from these negotiations. The main thing here for me to see is once again to fix Putin's inability to negotiate against the fact that the pots installed by Trump continue to tick, and the Russian game of imitation, as we have recently seen, is not taken seriously by America and moreover by Europe. Vladimir Medinsky did not make an impression on the NATO General Secretary, neither on Trump. Meanwhile, the American Senator Lindsey Graham, in his own way, motivates Putin to negotiate in the style of the hot names of the American militants of the 90s. Putin, your turn is coming. Trump is tired of this game and is going to kick your ass. He promised on the Fox News air, I don't know, I managed to parody, I'm such a parodist. Senator Graham warned China, India, and Brazil about the harsh tariffs for the purchase of about 80% of cheap Russian oil, which they supply to the Russian military machine. According to him, if they continue to buy Russian oil, the United States will introduce such tariffs that the Russian economy will be crushed. If Trump were in Putin's place, he would immediately sit at the negotiating table, added Graham. And I would, well, pay attention to the fact that Graham, after his own bill, well, in fact, there was no need for him, as you can see, did not be upset and did not crawl under the rug. And this is what drives me to think that, in principle, Graham achieved his goal. His task was not to have a specific piece of paper with his last name somewhere accepted. His task was to threaten the United States, Russia, and its partners with secondary sanctions, and he achieved this completely. Now about secondary sanctions, secondary postings. The buyer of Russian oil says Donald Trump and puts a specific ultimatum and not an American senator, like 84 American senators. Therefore, I believe that Graham and his bill have fully fulfilled their task. Now it's Trump's turn, which of course adds a lot of unpredictability to this whole structure, because Trump is still Trump. Yesterday, there was another meeting of the contact group on the coordination of military assistance of Ukraine in the Ramstein format. The meeting took place online, with representatives of 52 countries at the level of defense ministers or their deputies. Ukrainian Defense Minister Denys Shmyhal said that the country needs $6 billion to close the need for the production of weapons for the current year. This will allow us to produce more FPV drones, more interceptor drones to reflect the attacks of the Shahd, and additional long-range weapons so that the war continues in the territory of Russia, he said. The correspondent of Radio Liberty said. Most critical need of Ukraine is the air defense system and the ammunition to them, said U.S. Chief of Staff Alexander Syrsky. However, Germany and the U.S. have agreed on the transfer of 5 Patriot systems to Ukraine, reported the head of defense of Germany Boris Pistorius. Or he is Boris, in my opinion, Pistorius. In any case, in 2025, Ukraine's international help in the field of security reached the record $43 billion. This is the highest figure since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation. This was stated by the Secretary of the National Security Council of Defense of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov. British Defense Minister John Gilly said that Britain plans to provide Ukraine with £4.5 billion of military aid this year, which is the highest level in history. This aid includes £700 million of artillery, long-range missiles, and defensive missiles. Moreover, out of this amount, military support for $150 million has already been provided to Ukraine in the last 2 months, said Gilly. He added that the UK also provided Ukraine with almost 50,000 unmanned vehicles this year. The first results of the meeting were voiced by Denys Shmyhal. Canada will allocate us $14.6 million for the service of Ukrainian tanks and continue to participate in the financing of the Ukrainian OPK under the Danish model. The Netherlands will provide €200 million for drone interceptors and $125 million for the service of F-16 aircraft. Norway in 2025 will allocate a total of €1 billion for the purchase of drones, of which $400 million for the purchase of the Ukrainian OPK. Sweden is preparing a new package with air defense equipment, artillery, and equipment. Someone is upset that at the meeting it was not announced about the transfer of new planes, tanks, cannons, and the like, which the previous Ramsteins were famous for. But the fact is that now more and more attention is paid to the financing of the defense industry, including the Ukrainian one. For the rear Ukrainian cities, €200 million for drone interceptors is much more important than any tank. With a relatively low cost of such BPLs, these funds can be bought by literally tens of thousands of such drones. And given their 70% efficiency, which means that about 3 out of 4 strike the target, Ukraine can be closed from the Shahedas for at least a month. Nevertheless, the ready-made systems continue to enter Ukraine, and sometimes without any Ramsteins. In the Czech Republic, within the framework of the charitable project Gift for Putin, the collection of funds for 6 new 122 MD-30 howitzers has been completed. At the end of the collection, the organizers reported on their official website. The initiative, which is supported by the Embassy of Ukraine in Prague, has collected the necessary €2.4 million, which will allow you to buy the weapons and immediately transfer them to the front line. As the organizers noted, all shade Kaubitz are already available, which is an exceptional achievement in the current conditions, when most weapons have to wait months. As you know, the help of Ukraine should not only be involved in the supply of weapons and financing of the VPK, but also in the sanctions on Russia. However, in the sanctions regimes of Western partners, there are still annoying gaps, one of which was noticed by colleagues from the intelligence community informed Napalm. Analysts told how the Kremlin and Russian oligarchs are occupying occupied territories with the help of secret contractors, most of which are absent in Ukrainian and international sanctions lists. Here is the post informed Napalm on this topic. 256 Cyberstorm Company received access to the correspondence of Russian ministries and provided informed Napalm with exclusive closed internal documentation with lists of almost 200 Russian companies that directly participate in the so-called special infrastructure project. These companies actually play the role of gaskets between the state budget of the Russian Federation and the oligarchs close to Putin. Despite the strategic role of certain companies in providing occupation, the overwhelming majority of them have not yet fallen under Ukrainian or international sanctions. This allows them to run a business without hindrance, buy equipment, and support the economy of the aggressor. For example, in the published lists which the Russian ministries tried to hide, there is also an AOGKEKS, which has a state contract of the Russian Federation for more than $35 billion. Earlier, investigators have already established that its actual curator is Gugashev SRF officer, Alexei Vlasov, better known under the old name of the GRU. The Axanian Society of the X Group, a large Russian contractor receiving significant state contracts, has indirect but stable connections with Kremlin oligarchs Arkady and Boris Rotenberg, who are part of Vladimir Putin's closest circle. The connection with Rotenberg indicates a possible involvement in the higher-level corruption schemes, where Vladimir Putin can be the main beneficiary. We openly call on the National Security Agency, Ukraine, and professional international institutions to study the data provided by Russian companies and to contribute their contribution to the sanctions list, says Inform Napalm. We invite readers to spread this research in social media and media. We bring the secrets of the Kremlin to clean flame, researchers conclude. You can read the full text of the investigation on Inform Napalm's website, and I once again thank the colleagues of other activists and journalist investigators who carry out an invaluable, especially important investigation. When Trump overtook half of the state apparatus, including American law enforcement agencies who should have done this work, but as we can see, they don't do it. Therefore, to stop the flow of equipment interaction with Russian companies is one of the most important tasks, because Russia still can't do anything on its own, absolutely nothing. And this is a fact of reality. Therefore, sanctions and, what is important, non-touring of sanctions and in time to add new appearing pads and so on and so on. This is very important. One of the primary tasks in order to block the Russian car of oxygen for the possibility of continuing the war. Well, we continue with you because of the opportunity to help the Ukrainian units. Thank you very much for helping to close. The next assembly you have actually closed. Fighters, as always, thank you, but the queue is still big. There are still a lot of Ukrainian military who need our support and who continue to risk their lives, give their lives to protect the country from fascists and aggressors, in order to protect relatives and loved ones there. Not only in principle, citizens of Ukraine. Ukrainian cities, therefore we continue. Gather with you and today the Nacke team. For SBPAK 33 OSHP, here is their address to you. We wish you good health. The members of the shooting battalion of the 33rd Separate Assault Regiment are happy to be a part of the Maidla NAC for its work on the information front. We also appeal to the Maidla and the participants of its channel to support the collection of Maverick 3T, Maverick Enterprise and its complex antennas. For our group of solid air forces, here the QR code for Monobank has appeared. In the description of Monobank is private, PayPal, and USDT RC20, that is, cryptocurrency. I will take part in this meeting, of course, as in all the others. I hope you will take part too. Let's help the Ukrainian defenders. Well, we're moving on. The continuous influx of Ukrainian drones continues to cause a transport collapse in Russian airports. From 8 a.m. on Sunday to 8 a.m. Monday, 118 flights were canceled in the airports of the Moscow region and Pulkovo. Delayed for 2 hours and longer, 203 flights are scheduled, according to the Rose Aviation. In addition, 59 planes went to reserve airfields. Aeroflot plans to enter into schedule by the evening of Tuesday and other airlines. Until the end of Monday, on weekends and in the morning of Monday. July 21, restrictions were introduced in Russian airports, including in Sheremetyevo, because of the attack of Ukrainian drones. At the moment, all Russian airports, except for the Kaluga airport, work in the state regime, according to the Association of Tour Operators of Russia. Since the beginning of May, the restrictions on the operation of affected at least 200,000 passengers. Every 10th of those who use air transport, the situation on the railway looks much better. Tens of trains were detained at the Moscow Pavlitsky station yesterday. As Astria Chetatinitsa said, the suburban trains and the intercity trains are detained too. Some directions the delay is already about 2 hours. People in fact sleep in the waiting room. Trains are being detained. Volgograd and Kamyshin have been standing for an hour. Astria Chetatinitsa says, according to her words, the loudspeakers announced that the trains are being detained for technical reasons, not according to the schedule, but according to the readiness. As we all know, the technical reasons are the targeted Ukrainian strikes on the railway infrastructure. On the night of July 21, Ukrainian BPAs attacked a large railway station Kamennolomni in the Rostov region. Moreover, the destruction on their daily photos turned out to be so large-scale that on the Ukrainian channel, Colonel GSA suggested that either the Ukrainian drones were hit by particularly powerful combat units or Kamennolomni was hit by something more powerful, for example, by the Sapsan missile complex. In addition to the replacement of the Ukrainian ballistics before the military development, the authorities recently reported. But there have been no confirmations yet. Here are the next Sapsons who began to walk. On the Russian railway, information about the delay of trains was also confirmed. In the Moscow railway, a transport message with the annexed Crimea was also violated. At 14 yesterday, 15 Tavria trains were delayed. Reported the Crimean railway operator Grad Service Express. The delay was from 2 to 4.5 hours. Zetniks are puzzled why Russia cannot close its own sky from Ukrainian drones. It is quite strange, for example, in the channel of 2 Major. The enemy in July twice provoked a transport collapse which cost tens of billions of rubles and caused conflicts in airports, up to traffic jams, such as missing tickets to Venice through Istanbul. The tactics of a caravan of drones from the Soviet Union are not new. Thus, the enemy acted in May, trying to disrupt the arrival of the delegation to the victory parade, and yet the plane carrier in the Moscow air zone. Plane carrier is a regime that is introduced in the airspace of Russia in case if the aircraft illegally entered the airspace of the country and was used by the military, in relation to the object of the violator of the weapon. In combat equipment and in the sky, unknown airships and other objects were discovered. In connection with the complex, we know that Russia has a huge amount of POO funds. Everyone sees the work of the panzers. There are videos with combat helicopters knocking down enemy drones. Even mobile fire groups have often appeared, some of which have laser weapons approved. However, such expensive ways of fighting do not meet the requirements of war for a long time. Resource of aircraft is not to the devil. More calculations are increasingly paying attention. The lack of corresponding payments and laser weapons are still at the stage of trials. It was necessary to fire machine guns with pickups. Massively in the 22nd year, now the enemy already massively uses drone interceptors. We also have such, but not massively. There is also the old aviation which can patrol the sky during the day. There is also a communication system which must be integrated without paying attention. The demands of respected military personnel, all opportunities to create on the western borders, not on the flight to the capital, are not criminal for most of the enemy drones. And the one who will be able to produce and use the PVO means will win the battle for it. Yes, there are risks of falling debris. There is a threat of friendly fire. I am sure that in the 21st century this is resolvable. But it is clearly at least not so expensive. To disassemble the consequences of flights at the plants or to deal with the stopped work at airports and train stations. Why is there no department of ready-made unification of people with appropriate powers? The question is asked on the Z channel. It seems to us that the bureaucracy does not want to change anything because drones are being shot down. Even in the Moscow region almost every hour. The most surprising thing is an attempt to keep the population calm. Bureaucracy and the principle, no matter what, are infuriating the sleeping citizens. After all, everything is fine, they said on TV. So why is there no flight to Istanbul? After all, we do not know how our citizens live in prefrontal regions, includes the Z channel. Russian fight with unmanned vehicles is often born in the safety theater, showing measures that do not give any real protection. Gazprom neft. I'll fine of 100,000 rubles for an attempt. Transfer the phone to its NPP. Also, now any devices of GPS, smartphones, navigators, and even cars with geolocation are prohibited at the disposal of the base. There was an order signed by the general rector of the Omsk NPP, according to the sources. Similar documents were signed at other factories. According to the document on July 14, there are new safety rules. Now it is prohibited for workers to bring their phones into the territory of cars with GPS enabled and use any technology that transmits geolocation. For ordinary workers, a fine of 5,000 rubles is considered a violation, but representatives of suborganizations will have to pay a fee of 100 rubles. Owners may be exhaled. The ban does not spread on them unless, of course, there is no built-in GPS. Can someone explain to me what the logic of ZVN Corp Roman Sopinkov is? Does the enemy not know where the factories are, or does the Gazprom leaders think that hackers can break the phone of the workers and use it to make a malicious drone? The man doesn't seem to live in Russia and doesn't know how it all happens. The measures are taken, the hand is registered, the security service can distribute awards. And when the next time it will fly on the next PP, then we don't know anything. The measures have been taken. Here is the report from the military, who did not protect us. So Roman Sopinkov has to somehow turn his head to Russia and understand what is going on. In short, the tactic of disturbing attacks from the Ukrainian side is cheap because it is not about dozens of drones, it is about hundreds. It is incredibly effective. It destroys Russian logistics, aviation, railways, and Russia has nothing to cover it with. That is, either to pull the air defense from the front or something else in this direction. In short, Russia cannot defend itself from this. Therefore, I hope that we will see more such attacks, and if Ukraine has the opportunity to do them, At least every week and better every few days, especially in the context, we will probably talk separately with you. But in short, the story is that these 50 days that Trump gave is such a rather interesting story, because from the outcome of these 50 days, it will be possible to draw some kind of line, at least pre-Russian offensive, while it goes out of hand. He is bad, well that is, yes, Russia is moving somewhere. Basically not even close to the limits. In which Russia was counting. The second is that people in Russia publicly know. They know about the proposal of Ukraine. And therefore they have more and more motivation to want this world, to want this truce, which shows the polls. Well, the third is the Russian business, which is also breathing fine, and as it were, the end of the war will not completely save it, but at least the war will cease to dig a hole into which they are getting deeper and deeper. Therefore, this pressure from different sides on power, not in the sense of revolution, not in the sense of rallies, but in the sense of the general desire to conclude the truce, it can have its own effect. And of course, Ukrainian attacks, which firstly do not lead to casualties and secondly really paralyze the system. They have a very serious impact on this. Russia continues terrorist attacks on the territory of Ukraine, which rather motivates Ukraine for even more intense resistance. On the night of July 22, Russia delivered a new massive missile drone strike on the capital cities of Ukraine. It hit Kiev and the Kharkiv region, Ivano-Frankivsk region. This is what Vladimir Zelensky told us about this attack. Saving and emergency operations continue in our cities and towns after the Russian shelling, said Zelensky on the morning of July 21. There are damage to the Kiev region, Kharkiv region, Ivano-Frankivsk region. Drone strikes in Sumskoye, Khmelnytsky, Kirovograd region, Nikolaevsk, Poltavsk, and Kherson regions have been knocked down. The strikes of Russia are always strikes against humanity. Children's gardens burned in Kiev, houses and other civilian infrastructure were destroyed. There are destruction of ordinary houses in Kharkiv and Ivano-Frankivsk oblasts. 15 people were wounded. The youngest boy was 12 years old. Everyone gets help. 2 people died during the attack. My condolences to relatives and close ones. This night, Russia released more than 240 drones, more than 20 missiles, including ballistic attacks. Continued all night and lasted until the very morning. In the morning again, there were strikes against Shahids in the Kharkiv oblast. Mobile fire groups worked during the shelling. Army aviation, RAP, wars, air forces, drone interceptors. Many targets were shot down, but unfortunately not all. Therefore, we must continue to scale the production of interceptors. This is a decision that will allow us to protect ourselves from massive attacks. I am grateful to everyone who works in Ukraine for the sake of protection of life, for the sake of building up the production of weapons, strengthening our air force, and to those who continue to work on sanctions. Only the real pressure on Russia can stop this aggression, concluded the president of Ukraine, and is absolutely right. Now let's move on to the front line. MDIP State writes about the ongoing battles in the previously occupied Kondrativka in the Sumy direction, referring the settlement to the gray zone. ZVN blogger Anatoly Radov geolocalizes the arrival of Russian planned air bombs in Kondrativka, thereby confirming that there are fighters of the Ukrainian defense forces there. Ukrainian war bomber Konstantin Mushavets reports about the transfer of Russian reserves to the Sumy region and notes that in the ongoing battles, no country can achieve its goals. Russian troops fail to restore the active offensive against the Ukrainian, completely stop the enemy's advance. According to his assessment, Russian armed forces are trying to attack the youth at the same time, stop the Ukrainian counterattacks on the border of Kondratovka and Alexievka, and force Ukrainian armed forces to retreat from the eastern part of Tyakin by attacking Beslovka. Team State notes the advance of the Russians on the eastern flank of the Pokrovsky direction, in the area of Novodoretsky and Poltevka, and in Popov Yar, as well as in the area of Shevchenko to the south of Pokrovsky in the direction of the city itself. The project tells separately about the situation with the penetration into the city line of the Pokrovsky Russian DRG, which was reported by the Ukrainian military and volunteers a few days ago. A couple of days ago, the Russians, using the fact that one of the brigades had a banal end to the infantry, as well as an incomplete situation in the places, penetrated the city itself through Zivorivo, they write in Deep State. Fighters of the 155th Mechanized and 68th J Brigade urgently had to fix the situation, so that it did not grow into a catastrophe. Now the search for the destruction of these groups is still going on. Someone has already been eliminated, someone has not yet. The purpose of the ESRF is obviously to wait for the arrival of reinforcements and take control of the streets of the defenders of Ukraine. Unfortunately, on our part, there's a loss. In addition, the number of cases of friendly fire has increased. After all, the DPRK knew almost immediately, but most did not understand neither the routes nor the exact location. Therefore, the news about such penetrations should be given with a cold head, advises Deep State. The Ukrainian military author of the Telegram channel Officer also shared his vision of the situation. In the south of Pokrovsk in recent days, there is a high activity of Russian DRGs, especially yesterday and today, he said on July 21. Several vehicles of the Ukrainian defense forces have already been shelled, and unfortunately there are 200 and 300. Therefore, be extremely careful when moving in the areas of the city adjacent to the line line of combat collision. Activation of such groups is a rather alarming signal and can testify to the new attempt by Russian armed forces to capture Pokrovsk. Last time, the Russian DRGs tried to actively penetrate the city, when they planned to capture it from the east after taking Osledovo and a number of other settlements in the autumn of 1924. After we managed to stabilize the defense and carry out stabilizing tactical counterattack actions on the approaches, such attempts to break through ceased, the officer recalls. Let's hope that the success will be repeated this time. Meanwhile, Konstantin Mushevit reports that the Russian command transferred additional reserves to Suvorov and Rodinskaya, trying to break through to Dobropolye and cut off this settlement from the Pokrovsk-Myrnograd agglomeration. It blocked one of the key supply lines. The advance in these directions in 2 days was 1.2 and 2.3 kilometers, respectively. Also, Russian troops advanced 250-300 meters to Poltavka and Rusinyar, covering the right flank of the offensive. According to a survey conducted by Clement Malin on the basis of satellite images, for a week from July 11, 1925, the VKSRF delivered 450 airstrikes on the part of the front. In the area of Rodinskoye, dozens of strikes are required on each multi-story building, landing in Ukrainian positions. In addition, Moshevitz writes VSRF was activated south of Pokrovsk, moving 1.6 km to Zivorivo and catching the southern part of the village. On the western flank, the direction of the last Moshevitz, the VSRF managed to move up to 1.5 km on the outskirts of Mirovko, Novnikivko, as well as go to the western outskirts of Yuno and cut the Pokrovsk-Zhivya highway to the west from it. The analyst makes a conclusion about the preparation of the VSRF to storm Pokrovsk, noting that it is not advisable to defend it with large forces, because they are initially in an unfavorable position, which could be avoided by organizing defense on the flanks in advance. Moshevitz believes that the Russian forces are trying to bypass the Klebenbig reservoir between Kostyantynivka and Totsk from the west and east to cut off the group of the Ukrainian defense force defending south of it. He claims that the actions of the VSRF in the Yablanovka and Alexander Kilinov areas were unsuccessful, when he managed to move 1 kilometer under the White Mountain to Alexander Shultin. Deep State records progress of Russian armed forces in the southern Donetsk region, in the Andriivka and Volnoy fields. The project also publishes a frame of strikes on the Russian infantry in the Volnoy field. It accompanies this video in the following comment. Despite the loss of Shevchenko, the Russians do not pass further to the west. In the Volnoy field, the situation is slightly worse as Russian assault groups sink into the direction of Kamyshevak, but they manage to discover and destroy them in time. In Eskrzynka, at the moment, the most difficult situation as it is difficult to determine the line of contact there. The enemy is already entering the village from the north and from the east. Fighting continues, the Deep State reports. Zinatin Mushevitz writes about the crawling offensive of Russian armed forces on Siversk, during which the advance from Verkhny Kamensky was 1 kilometer per day. Also, according to his information, the Russian military will advance by 2.2 kilometers to the north from Ivanodarivka. In the future, Mushevitz predicts an attempt to capture the crossing and an attack on Zivanovka in an attempt to break through to Siversk from the south. According to the estimates of the Mushevitz, Russian armed forces is trying to break through the Ukrainian defense from Jerebet River in the direction of Novy, Lyman, and Drobyshev, as well as to push the Ukrainians out of Serebryansk forest. In addition, according to the material of the Observer, Russian assault groups were able to break through to the northern part of the village of Torsk on the left bank of the Jerebt. However, they were in isolation. Other Russian units are trying to approach them from the northeast, overcoming 1.5 km. The Mushevitz report on the progress of the Russian troops 200 meters in the direction of the Volchansk huts and about the assault actions on the territory of Volchansk, as well as about unsuccessful attempts to occupy the borderline. On the other side of the border, in the area of the recently occupied Milovoy, the situation is much worse, says the author of the channel officer. Russian armed forces having captured Milovoy is trying to further develop its success, writes he. At the moment, the Russian forces have already entered the settlements of Chuganovka and Ambarnaya. The further advance of the Orks is now problematic. They cannot be established, but the very fact of this situation is not pleasant, states the officer. Stanislav Bunyatov characterizes the combat actions at the Kharkiv border as follows. The Russians have opened another direction in the Kharkiv region in order to distract our reserves from the Kupiansk direction. In general, the situation is not too favorable for us. The great length of the border allows Russian armed forces to carry out similar actions almost all over the line. Such fires, due to the lack of reserves, have to be extinguished point by point, attracting the forces of the brigade, which are already performing combat tasks directly on the front, Bunyatov notes. He also reposted a rather pessimistic message from the Ukrainian channel Chornol, in which the following is said. The SRF is moving in Volchansk on the flank in the area of the settlements of the Volchansk huts and Staritsa. Also, as far as is known, in the last 3 days, the Russians tried to capture the settlement of Dektirna. There are also minimal advances. At this site, the VSRF is more and more actively using fresh reserves and achieving success on the battlefield after a certain stabilization in this direction. In addition, it is increasingly reducing the gap between Kupiansk and Volchansk. There was a case when the foot of an enemy infantryman stepped on the other bank of the Volchansk River, which did not happen in the last year. But after the fire strike, these attempts of forced reinforcing successfully crossed. In general, the trend is unfavorable. The author of the channel concludes that the Russians are suppressing small but constant steps. The resource Okogoro, meanwhile, publishes a photograph of the progress of Russian armed forces over the past week, from July 14 to July 20, on the basis of the Kharkiv state. Overall, during this period, the progress was on average 13 square kilometers per day, a week earlier 23, and a week before that 32. According to the 3-week trend, it can already be said that the pace of the Russian offensive is slowing down again after the slump in early July, or at the end of June. A lot depends on the lag when the map is updated. Let's make a conclusion that the progress of the Russians has not stopped in any case, but the catastrophic scale has not yet reached. Russian drone operators began a mass hunt for Ukrainian reconnaissance UAVs of the aircraft type, says the Ukrainian specialist of UAVs Sergei Flash Beskresnov. According to him, it took Russians a year to copy the Ukrainian experience of spying on enemy scouts, but at the same time, the Ukrainian side has not taken any countermeasures. The sudden success of Russian armed forces in striking down the Ukrainian wings is due to the appearance of compact 3D RLS. According to all probabilities of Chinese production, Flash is sure. As one of the most effective countermeasures, he sees the appearance of these very RLS on the fronts, as well as the scaling of the production of reconnaissance BPA. It was the last way the Russians chose to solve the problem of striking down their scouts with Ukrainian drones. The war of drones with drones is becoming an increasingly important element of modern military actions, as I told in a recent video, if you missed it. General Staff of the Soviet Union reported the loss on July 20 in the Belgorod region of the ZRK S-300P. The news is good, but it got even better when the center from the project, Siversk, was watched, and it was established that the target turned out to be even fatter. That's what the analysts wrote. Our team, which has extensive experience in the search for the identification of radar means from the ZRK of the enemy, immediately paid attention to the fact that the loss was not shown on the video by the S-300P, but by the elements of the S-400 complex, in particular by the multifunctional radar station 92N6E, based on the MZKT-7930 chassis as well. There's two BAS 69,092,012 pulleys with a capacity of 1, which transports energy systems to ensure the operation of the RLS itself. MLRS 92N6E performs a backlighting. The target for the missile is the most important element of the complex. Without it, the missiles do not fly. Therefore, the destruction of such an element will completely fail because of the IRC, concluded by Siversk. Russian military have mastered the tactics of applying gifts from Comrade Kim. The author of the channel officer tells the story of a small-sized rocket launcher. Active application of the enemy of the North Korean RZO Type 75 is observed in various directions, he writes. You have already seen one video from the Achilles unit in the Cupid direction, but the tendency of using such installations against the enemy is traced along the entire battle line. Scheme is quite simple and effective. The RZO is compact, so the orcs drag it into the landing position at a distance of 5-6 km from the LBS, make a salvo and roll it back. The salvo is small-sized. If there is no ammunition inside, then it is practically impossible to destroy it only with a direct hit. The guide can be repaired quite quickly and replaced by unblocking the rear sight. According to the script, they also have a relatively small ammunition kit compared to the BM-21 and so on, adds the officer. Volunteer Evgeny told about a difficult situation with the provision of the 98th Airborne Division units. Military Unit 654-51 also paid attention to the will of the Foundation's leadership. The man reported that despite the beautiful story of the Foundation's representative and the good supply provided by the 98th Airborne Division, in reality, the situation only gets worse. In general, it becomes clear why this very 98th Airborne Division has been fighting for more than a year for hours without much success compared to other areas. I said that there are a lot of applications and the guys buy everything for their own account. In general, nothing has changed. It seems to me that it has become even worse. Even more applications have become. According to Evgeny, the appeal for help from military personnel is becoming more and more as they no longer have the opportunity to buy everything themselves. We say nothing, we repair the car ourselves, we buy everything ourselves, we invest everything in our own money, and volunteers help. Also, Evgeny paid attention to the fact that not those fighters who deserve it and are able to change something for the better, but those who are convenient for the authorities. They will attract their own people who are convenient for them. And based on what is happening now, this is what happens because some fighters who are now during the time of the heroes who are now entering the deputies also give in to our authorities and say, yes, yes, thank you, comrades, governors, deputies, only thanks to you, everything is fine with us, the guys. Of everything, this is a lie, an honest lie. Such a situation of the case causes indignation among the fighters, since they do not understand how their yesterday's co-workers, having got to the authorities, quickly change their clothes and forget about the problems of supply. The guys themselves, these guys recently sat in the trenches, they were at the front, they know all this, they were with us, and now they came there and changed their clothes and say that the guys are fine. In addition, the volunteer spoke with a critic in the address of the head of the fund, Maria Nedobshkina. This man pulls the governor's fund to the bottom, but she does everything in order to just, I don't know what she is doing there. She just does something there for the sake of some kind of gain. I know a lot of information about her, talked to people from school. She comes to our school, we collect and ask what the guys need: napkins, sweets, cookies, coffee, tea. She says, yes, you can collect sweets, but it's better to collect with money. We need everything we can buy. You know, this guy is a governor's fund which is filled from all sides. She goes to collect money from kids. This woman, I don't know how to call her, she is engaged in humanitarian aid. Because they are still in some videos in the news where they were shooting some kind of movie. They say, we are a fund that unites all volunteers. This is the most powerful. This is just a swamp that thinks only how to make money. She has long said that she works only for money, she doesn't hold anything else. She is not a patriot, she is nobody at all, she just makes money. Evgeny gave an example of how people in the fund ask for help with money and not with what they have. And the head of the fund, Maria Nedopshkina, is not afraid of accusations, as she is in good relations with the deputy governor, Evgeny Nestorov. The fund is convinced that it is necessary to gain decisiveness and achieve the elimination of such leaders. There are guys, the guys tear off their legs every day. Someone dies, they fight for us for what they fight. I don't understand at all. I communicate every day with mothers, with wives, fighters, with those who have already died. You feel this pain, and we are sitting here like these, and we are afraid to say something to them. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can't continue like this. We need to solve something, we need to just get up and change the whole corporation right here. But fortunately, as we know well, this will not happen, and the funds will continue to steal money, and thank God. It has long been known that the mobilized former separatist fighters of Donbass are considered, even by the standards of the Russian army, as second-rate people. And now it turned out that this is also common in exchange for prisoners. The relative of the prisoner asked the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, why do they say that they exchanged only from the Rostov region and further? And we are not needed here. Well, we are exactly the same people. Niece of the prisoner soldier of the 7th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade, Military Unit 41620 for Dolbolova Vitalia, born in 1982, reported that the family of the fighter collided with a previous relationship when trying to get Vitaly on the list for exchange. Anastasia said that after applying to numerous instances, it turned out that it was not easy to obtain the status of a military prisoner despite the presence of evidence. Why did we not behave very well? Since everyone closed their eyes, no one was interested in it. Where is he? What is he? Well, it's just easier to make a statement that he died than to look for him. After Vitaly was recognized as a prisoner of war, it turned out that the prisoners of war from DPR and LPR are not included in the list for exchange. Luhansk and Donetsk people are not changed. Well, we all see it. As soon as the exchange takes place, there was not a single person from Lugansk and Donetsk regions who returned home. This suggests that prisoners of war from these regions have no opportunity to return home. She asked the president to pay attention to this injustice, to eliminate it, and to contribute to the return of Vitaly home. So that they finally paid attention to us, so that in all exchanges our relatives also participated in the same way. Participant of the war from the Tyumen region killed his wife on a wedding night. The court sentenced him to a long time in a prison cell, but he stated that he wanted to return to the front. Yekaterinburg Garrison War Court sentenced the participant of the war in Ukraine, Alexei Marchukov, who was sentenced to 12 years and 6 months in prison for the murder of his wife on the night after the marriage was registered, according to the Military Investigation Department of the SSK of Russia, by the Tyumen Garrison. Young Sergeant Alexei Marchukov, on a short vacation from the so-called special military operation in Ukraine, killed his wife with a knife on the ground of jealousy. On the eve of March 4, Alexei, his wife Marina, officially registered the marriage. In the evening, they went to visit Alexei's sister, where they were drinking in the family circle. As the local publication 72 RU said, his sister Lyubov was a regular visitor. According to the investigation, late in the evening, the spouses returned home to the village of Yudzinskaya, where there was a fight between them. During the conflict, Alexei stabbed Marina with a knife in the chest. The woman died from massive blood loss. The son of the deceased, Andrei, said that his mother loved Alexei, despite the fact that he had raised his hand on her before. Last year there was a case when his mother disappeared. The next day she only appeared on the internet. He beat her up, she said she couldn't live like that. The next day they made up. He knelt down and begged her to come back, says the son of the murdered Andrei. Marchukov was previously repeatedly accused of debauchery. According to his sister, he signed a contract with the Ministry of Defense after he was offered a choice prison or participation in the war. He became a volunteer and served as a branch commander. The court recognized Murchikov guilty of the murder in Article 105 of the CRF. In the process, he stated that after the execution of the punishment, he intended to return to the front, and most likely he will do this before the execution. Here is such a new elite. I repeat once again, stay away from all kinds of Russian military. This is just a way to the grave because they are all post-Soviet fascist occupants who will be killed, and that's it. They will kill you just walking down the street. They will kill you there, even if you are their wife or child. Stay as far as possible. Well, if you are threatened by the Russian army in certain situations, then just avoid it as much as possible. Do not get there. It is much worse than prison. With much more probability you will die. If you have already fallen into the Russian army, run away from there, run with the help of the detainees, surrender to the Ukrainian military. In general, try to stay away from the Russian army in this context. This is a true death, in addition to the fact that it is a moral scum and the formation of a part of the fascist occupation forces. Well, Michael Nacke was with you, and see you soon. All the best. Bye.